So, welcome everyone to today's Dharma talk. The topic of the Dharma talk today is equanimity. So, I'll describe it. I'll talk about how it's a quality of wisdom, and I'll talk about it how it is the result of insight and serenity meditation practice, and it is also a practice in and of itself as a divine abode. So, if we want to understand equanimity, it also requires us to understand karma, what we mean by karma. So I'll also briefly talk a little bit about karma and the principles of what is, in Buddhism anyway, called wholesome and unwholesome. So other English words for equanimity include peacefulness, emotionally balanced, centered, impartial responsiveness, calmness, stillness, stability, unshaken, even-handed, serene, impartial, and of course, equipoise. And when I've referred to equanimity in training that I've done over the years, I've often called it, I've called it something like a wise perspective, or having a committed purpose, or having an inner stability, or a resilience, an inner resilience, or the power and strength of being completely centered, stable, and grounded. And sometimes I've talked about it as emotional flexibility. And I've often used the analogy of a bamboo being flexed by the wind. That's like equanimity. So the way we are, the way we beings are, we humans, arises from many causes and conditions coming together. As I was mentioning earlier, many of these causes and conditions are completely beyond our control. Like we don't have a choice with our genetic inheritance or our social upbringing or the nations and the cultures we're born into. And we certainly don't have control over disasters that may come our way, that many of us have experienced, or the traumas that have influenced our lives throughout our lives. So that despite all these uncontrollable factors that influence the way we humans are, there are some ways we can steer the directions of our lives. We can steer we can steer the directions our lives will unfold. And the way we do this is through our actions, through our decisions or our intentions, and the actions that are based on these decisions and intentions. So the term karma literally means actions. And karma is the psychological impulse behind an action. Karma as actions are like seeds that will ripen into fruit. And the actions we do or don't do need to be intentional for them to ripen into karmic fruit. So in Buddhism, intentional actions, or karma, is divided into wholesome and unwholesome. Wholesome karma, or wholesome actions, bears wholesome fruit. Unwholesome karma bears unwholesome fruit. And when I talk about wholesome here, I'm talking about wholesome. The way I define wholesome is those actions that are aligned with a path to freedom. Those actions that are aligned with the Eightfold Path, if you wish it. If you're not Buddhist, it doesn't have to be the Eightfold Path. It's a path of ethical conduct. It's a path of mental development, and it's a path of wisdom. These are three components of the Eightfold Path, and you can translate that into any kind of language you wish. But it's wholesomeness, I think, kusala it's called in Pali, is about steering down the path that is away from suffering, away from sukha dukkha. Unwholesome, unwholesome is those sorts of actions that ultimately lead to getting further and further entangled into samsara, further and further feeding into suffering for oneself and or others. So that's my definition of wholesome or unwholesome. And of course, ethical actions or virtuous actions or uh, um, having integrity, for example, are all ethically wholesome, and they are, it's like good karma, if you want to think about it like that. So karma, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things that come about in life that uh, that are instrumental or influence the way our lives unfold. As I mentioned, many of these things are completely beyond our control. And karma is just part of the picture for how things and how life unfolds. Um, Karma involves a choice to act or not act. It is intention. And we create karma with our choices and our actions that come with the with our actions are about the things that come our way. And it's beyond our unenlightened capacity to work out what fruits result from what karma. But it is possible for us to discern what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is wise and what is unwise. So, equanimity is an aspect of wisdom, and it includes the understanding that actions have impacts, actions have effects, causes have effects, causes have results. And we think with equanimity, one can realize that situations are often the results, situations we find ourselves in life are often the results of previous choices, and that each and every different individual must be responsible for their own actions. Nobody else can be responsible for their actions. The way things unfold, I know it's because of many things, but this slither of opportunity, this sliver of possibility, is based on what type of karma we create, and only we are the owners of our karma, if that makes sense. We can't own another's karma. We can't feel responsible for another person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Uh, and we can't feel responsible for the way other people's lives unfold. As I've mentioned a couple of times here, many conditions about that unfolding is completely out of everyone's control, except for the actions that people take, except for the way they respond to things that come their way. So actions driven by kind intent will be more likely to have wholesome outcomes than actions driven by cruel intent. So with wisdom, we also understand that the way events are interpreted is dependent on each and every different individual's perception, worldview, and beliefs. An innocent action may be praised by some and criticized negatively by others. And it's simply completely unhelpful to believe, for example, that everyone should like us. Everyone should, like the way we are or what we do. And that even throughout history, blameless and courageous saints have had their critics. And further than this, have actually been harmed because of other people's misjudgments and misperceptions. According to one Buddhist master, Sayadaw U Pandita, uh, he says that equanimity is the quality of mind that remains centered without inclination towards extremes. And the wonderful late, great, venerable Thich Nhat Hanh talked about equanimity as a quality of non-attachment, even-mindedness, non-discrimination, and letting go. And according to Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein, equanimity is the spacious stillness of the mind that provides the foundation for the other sublime states. The other sublime states are loving kindness, compassion, and appreciative joy. And within these four divine abodes, when equanimity is considered as a divine abode, equanimity has a balancing aspect to the other three divine abodes. It helps to balance it overall. So coming back into this equanimity and the way we understand it as kind of having a balanced perspective on things. In Buddhist psychology, the eight worldly winds, many of you have heard me talk about this, the eight worldly winds are four sets of opposite circumstances that destabilize our sense of emotional balance. They blow us around. They're called winds because they blow us around. They are circumstances that our egos often either yearn for and crave for, or reject and fear. These four sets are praise or honor and blame, loss or failure, and gain or success, pain or unhappiness, and pleasure, temporary happiness, fame and notoriety, and disrepute, which is another way of thinking about disgrace, embarrassment, and insignificance. So the thoughts of most people in the world are preoccupied with concerns about the eight worldly winds. Most people, for example, like to receive praise and do not like being accused of wrongdoing. Most people like success and they like to gain things. They fear losing what they've achieved. Most people generally seek out pleasure and avoid pain at all costs. Similarly, most people like to have social esteem and like to be noticed and do not want to be disgraced or embarrassed or feel socially insignificant. Most people like social acceptance and we don't like social rejection. This is the way of the world. And this is part of life. I mean, every day I'm caught up in these worldly winds. However, when we cling to them, excuse me, my dog's scratching at the door. I'm just going to let him in. Come on, Bucky, inside. He's sitting by the wire screen door. We'll see how long he sits there. The eight worldly winds are the ways of the world, and we're all caught up in them. However, if to the extent we cling to either one of them as like we reject the way when we get, if we kind of have strong aversion and cling to the need to be praised, for example, and reject also all type of criticism, then we're going to suffer. We can create enormous amount of suffering when we obsessively crave, grasp, and cling to one side of the pair and aggressively reject, condemn, and struggle with the other. Even the Buddha had his critics. And there were attempts to defame him. I can remember one time when one story I heard, there was people didn't like the Buddha. Some people got upset that they'd taken away their sons. The Buddha didn't take them away. They chose to join the Sangha. And these people, these business people got quite angry and upset with the Buddha. So they went about to defame him, and they asked the woman to pretend that she was, pregnant to the Buddha. And this woman, would come to the Dharma hall and listen to talks, and over time she started to look more and more pregnant. And then one time she stood up, and she didn't stand up. She said that the Buddha was the father of the child in her belly, and the Buddha just looked at her and said, "Only you and I know the truth of this matter." And she got unnerved, and she stood up. And apparently, when she stood up, this block of timber fell out underneath her from her sarong, and she left. And it was just apparently, the Devas got some mice to eat away the cords that were tying on this block of timber, looking like she was pregnant. Anyway, the point of this story is that I'm saying that even the Buddha had his critics. He had people trying to defame him, and he also had people trying to murder him. Devadatta attempted to murder him on 3 occasions, I think. So Devadatta was his cousin who was trying to take over the Sangha. So the Buddha, however, was unshaken by these worldly winds. He was caught up in praise and blame and loss and gain and so on. He was unshaken because he had equanimity. And equanimity is not kind of passive agreement. Sometimes people talk about equanimity as being this wussy kind of agreement with everything, but it's not. It is a powerful, it's a powerful quality that deeply accepts the reality of the situations. It deeply accepts the realities of life. And it's like an unshaken mountain in the midst of a violent storm. Equanimity provides emotional stability when challenged by life's vicissitude. Equanimity can also counter distorted thinking patterns, negative self-concepts, and taking personally negative life events. That one in particular, it's like when we can see that each and every individual is the owner of their actions, and only they can be responsible for the way they're thinking, feeling, and acting. At that point, we can realize that we can't really accept blame for the way people are feeling. Sometimes people try to dump blame on you for feeling the way they feel. Ultimately, it is their responsibility. I've had this challenged when I used to do groups and on the sessions on equanimity. This was years and years ago, like maybe 20 years ago. I would present the concept of equanimity and this accepting responsibility for our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to people. And the audience would sometimes come up with say, what about children who have been abused? How can they accept responsibility for the way they're feeling? And in response to that, I would say, well, we can't. I've got my eldest son is 43 years old at the moment, and back when he was about 4 or 5, I think it was about 4. There was one time when I needed to go to work, and I was looking after him. His mother wasn't around. I was responsible for caring for him at the time. His mother had gone to Sydney for a trip, and I remember I couldn't take him to the daycare because he had conjunctivitis and he was, coughing a lot. So I just hung out with him, and I took him down to the river and on my bike, and we had pizza together, and he was smiling and happy. And I noticed that I really, really, really wanted him to be better. I wanted him to heal himself. I wanted him to get over this conjunctivitis. And no matter how much I wanted him to heal and be better, he was only able to do that on his own means, by his own means. He himself could only heal himself. And in my life as a clinical psychologist, I've seen so many people. Back then, I was working with adolescents as well. I worked with children years and years ago. So many children and adolescents have suffered as a result of being harmed in some way or other, often with abuse. No matter how much I wanted them to heal, only they could heal themselves. So I would relate this sort of story because it's the way things are. It's this understanding of equanimity. When people become ill, for example, there's nothing we can do about it. They have to, well, we can help them, of course, but we have to sort of accept this reality. Um, my latest grandchild, uh, little boy born in January, the middle of January, January 17. He's a beautiful little boy. He's so lovely. Um, a couple of days later, after he was born, he had to go back into hospital because his bowels were obstructed. He had something called ileum. For those of you who are medical practitioners who may know what that is, uh, it's where the um, intestines kind of get sticky. So there's a blockage in the bowels. So we had to have an operation. And within 2 weeks, we realized that he's suffering with cystic fibrosis. Uh, he's and he's suffering. He's been in hospital. He's in hospital right now, actually. So he was in hospital. He had to get a stoma. He had to get all sorts of have an operation. Had to go through all sorts of processes. And now he's been in hospital last week or last 10 days or so because he has to get the stoma out. He's had the stoma cut out. The stoma is a little bag. So this needs a lot of equanimity. I noticed that there's nothing we can do other than deeply accept the reality of the situation. We do what we can. I do what I can as a grandfather, and help my son and his partner and the family as best we can. In the long run, we have to accept the reality of the situation. It's a severe illness. It's so ultimately, equanimity is the deep acceptance of the realities of life. Uh, so equanimity not only helps one cope with and manage difficult interpersonal interactions, it also, because it provides a balanced state of mind in order to see things equally and be able to see both sides of a conflict, it also provides us with the mental stability to accept deeply the realities of life. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes I've compared equanimity to the flexibility of bamboo. And bamboo has, of course, very strong structural properties, but it's also very flexible. So there's this flexible, strong structure that bends with the wind, but it also can hold great weight. So that's kind of like equanimity. It can really hold a lot of weight as well as being able to bend with the vicissitudes of life. And coming back to this power and strength of equanimity. Many of you know I once lived in a forest temple in northeast Thailand in the late 70s. And I lived with a very powerful Thai Achan. And this Achan, his name was Lumpur Ban, actually. He was incredibly kind and compassionate. He was so wonderfully kind to me. I remember I rolled up there after being away, and when he greeted me, he just smiled. His smile filled his face, and he said, "Oh, fantastic, you're back. It's really great to see you." Anyway, he was very kind and compassionate, but he wasn't a pushover. Uh, he would challenge and powerfully confront any indications of behaviors that were counter to the Buddha's teachings. There's a saying in Thai, it's called do, and this Achan was do. Do means stern, fierce. It's kind of, get out of there. So one day we went off to Pintaparta's arms round, and the village was probably about 5 kilometers away. Down you walk out the walls of the temple. The temple was, I don't know how big it was. It was quite large, probably about 3 or 4 kilometers across from one side to the other, and it was surrounded by a wall. And we go out through the wall and down the pathways and onto a gravel road, and we'd wind up at a village. And that was probably a round trip of about, I don't know, maybe an hour, something like that, to walk to the village and back again. So anyway, one day we came back and there was guards outside the door with soldiers with guns. And we walked into the temple, and there was soldiers with guns in the temple, in the grounds. And we kind of got our bowls ready and got ready to sit down and all the rest of it. And apparently there was a powerful general from the army come to visit and pay respects and give dana to the Achan. And Achan just told him to get out. He said, "Get those guns out of here. Get them out or leave." So he had to take the guns away. He had to put them outside. Had to take the soldiers away if they didn't want to release their guns. Put them outside that temple. And then the Achan welcomed the general. But the point I'm making was that he was very powerfully strong, stable, centered. He had power from his conviction and his faith and his confidence in what was right and what was wrong. So sometimes I've recollected that stability of Luang Por Ban, and it's given me a kind of strength and a stability, like standing like a mountain. Sometimes it would feel like, especially when people say attacking me for some reason or other, I can feel myself kind of grounding and standing firm in this stable posture. And I think about my teacher in respects to that. So equanimity is not confined to Buddhism, and parts of the well-known and often recited Christian serenity prayer, seem to encapsulate many of the themes related to equanimity. For example, it goes like this, or part of it goes like this: God, give us the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things that should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. So it's a really great prayer. Fantastic. You may have noticed me say something along those lines when I was inviting you to equanimity in the guided meditation earlier. I said, may I accept the things that can't be changed, and may I have the courage to change the things that need to be changed. There are 2 Pali words. Pali is an ancient Indian language that is probably closest to the way the Buddha spoke, the language that the Buddha spoke, that are used for equanimity in early Buddhism. These 2 words are upekkha, and I often find it difficult to say the next one, but I'll give it my best. Tatra majjahattata. So I'll say that again in a minute. But so as well as equanimity, the meaning of upekkha is to look over, as well as to see with patience. And it could also refer to seeing with understanding. And this seeing with understanding, or to look over, brings to mind for me like seeing the big picture, as if seeing from a distance. And I always come to mind like being on the top of a hill overlooking a battle, for example. You're seeing what's going on and you're seeing what's happening there, but you're not caught up in the battle. So equanimity is like seeing the bigger picture, but not being caught up in the dramas of life. Instead, we're just seeing it wisely, seeing it for what it is. And the second word, translated as equanimity, tatra mancha hattata. Hattata, it's a open vowel A on the last A. It's a compound made of the simple words, some Pali words. Tatra means there, and it sometimes refers to all these things. Majja means middle, and tatta means to stand or to pose. Put together, the word becomes to stand in the middle of all this. And as a form of equanimity, being in the middle refers to balance and remaining centered in the middle of whatever is happening. It's like a ballast, a ballast on a ship. It keeps the ship upright in the strong winds. Equanimity is this stability, calm, confidence, and integrity that gives us balance when we're blown around by the strong vicissitudes of the strong winds of life's vicissitudes. So, there are many ways we can cultivate equanimity. We can cultivate equanimity in daily life as we interact with people, places, and things. We can cultivate it when we reflect discursively. By discursively, I mean using words, like thinking verbally. When we reflect discursively on the realities of life, including illness and death. We can cultivate it when we meditate. And we can also cultivate it with impeccable ethics. One of the first support for equanimity is virtue or integrity. If we live ethically, we naturally have confidence in what we're doing. We naturally have a sense of blamelessness, and it becomes a real power. If we can be when we live with virtue, with honesty, and integrity, it is a real power. We take refuge in that power. So that's a support. That's a way of developing equanimity. Often people don't even meditate. Well, they don't formally meditate, and they just live with integrity. And you find they're people with that are demonstrating this equanimity, this power of integrity. Other supports for equanimity include faith or saddha. Saddha is the Pali term. It means, I think it literally means where we place our heart, or placing of the heart. Saddha, placing, and sad means heart, I think, and ta means to place. So where we place our heart, where we put our heart. It also means confidence and trust. So this is a really strong support for the development of equanimity. Saddha or faith is one of the spiritual powers as well. A well-developed mind and a sense of ease and well-being and wisdom are other supports. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, it's also possible to reflect, use discursive reflection as an aspiration to be centered and unshaken, and as a way to bring forth this quality. For example, if we can reflect on the impermanent, interconnected, and uncertain nature of life and our existence, it can bring an objective and sobering, emotionally balanced effect, a perspective that is sober, rather than being intoxicated with life thinking that we're going to be young and beautiful. Look at me, God. Maybe once I was good looking, whatever that means. But look at me now. Once I was young and strong, and I still feel pretty strong, but I'm very old now. I'm getting old. So, and we can all look in the mirror and see this. So there's something called the 5 recollections, which I mentioned earlier this morning. And I find the 5 recollections are a way to cultivate equanimity. And in fact, the fifth recollection, which I mentioned this morning, is actually used to cultivate equanimity. And that 5th reflection, as you'll hear in a minute, is about karma. It's about actions. So here are the 5 recollections. I'm of the nature to age. I've not got beyond aging. I'm of the nature to experience illness. I've not got beyond illness. I'm of the nature to die. I've not got beyond death. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, shall one day be parted from me, shall one day vanish. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions, abide supported by my actions. Whatever actions I shall do, of those actions I shall be the heir. And we can say this for all beings. All beings are of the nature to age. They have not got beyond aging. All beings are of the nature to experience illness. They have not got beyond illness. All beings are of the nature to die. They have not got beyond death. All that all beings consider as beloved and pleasing shall one day be parted from them, shall one day vanish. All beings are the owners of their actions, heir to their actions, born of their actions, related to their actions, abide supported by their actions. Whatever actions they shall do, of those actions they shall be the heirs. And as Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh once said, our actions are the ground we stand on. Our actions are our only possessions. As a young monk in Thailand, I mentioned I was in Thailand in the late 70s. There was a period where I couldn't sit with meditation very well. I couldn't do sitting meditation very well. It was due to restlessness, but it was also due to what I would say was illness. I had malaria the first year I was there, and the second year I contracted hepatitis A. So I was quite ill. I was very skinny, super skinny, much skinnier than I am now. And when I'd sit to meditate, my body would rock backwards and forwards in response to my heartbeat. It was difficult to do mindfulness of breathing. It was difficult to do a lot of meditations other than just kind of being present with the discomfort of my body. But the 5 recollections were a way that I could find some peace, the way I could find some deep acceptance with the realities of what was happening and the realities of the situation. And I still do these 5 recollections. Sometimes, sometimes a little bit slack, but the Buddha recommended that all people, whether lay or monastic, should do those 5 recollections on a daily basis. So, some days I do them, some days I don't. Back then I used to do it sometimes for an hour at a time, like I'm of nature to age, and I just go through my mind, seeing my aging and so on. So it can be quite a powerful meditation. Mindfulness and what is often called insight meditation leads to a particular type of equanimity. And there's an equanimity of insights, and there's something called an equanimity of constructions or fabrications, or what do they call it? Equanimity of formations. So formations are the ways we create things. Some of you heard me talk about mental formations in other talks. Mental formations are sankhara in Pali, but it's the way we create things. We create our worlds with our mental creations. I'm creating a world right now. There's a video screen in front of me, which is a mental creation. Really, when you look at it, you say, "Oh no, there's a real screen there," and it's true. It's a real screen there, but it's my mental fabrication. So with insight meditation, we begin to develop equanimity about formations. We see them for what they are. We see their mental constructs. And we don't crave after them or reject them. So we see what we do with insight meditation is usually direct our perceptions at dependent arising, which dependent arising is the way things come to be. It's this, it's quite complicated to explain, but you've all heard me say, when this is, that is, when this is, that is, when this is not, that is not. When this is, that is, with the arising of this, that will also arise. When this is not, that is not. With the ceasing of this, that will also cease. It's just the way conditions arise and pass away. So when we practice insight meditation, what we do is we begin to see dependent arising. We see what leads to what. We see conditionality, the way things are conditioned, and one thing leads to another. Well, there's no things, actually. What we begin to see, there's no things. There's just, and I can't resist saying it, streams of dependently arising processes and interactions. So with wisdom, we see that. We also see the universal characteristics of existence, being anicca, dukkha, anatta in Pali, or impermanence, which is anicca, dukkha, which is the unsatisfactory nature of things, because things are changing all the time. We can't find any enduring happiness in anything that changes. And anatta, meaning emptiness as well, meaning that there's no single thingness in all this. There's just the arising of conditions. There's no thing in all this, including the self in all this. The self is a mental construct again. So equanimity arises with insight meditation as well. So we start to see things as they are, and we're neither driven by craving after the pleasant or craving to avoid and reject the unpleasant. My dog just scratched again. I'll stop. I won't open the door just yet. Equanimity is also the result of serenity meditation. And many of you have heard me talk about the jhanas, which are they're highly refined states of concentration. All the states of concentration, actually, all the states of perceiving and being, actually. Anyway, there's a number of levels to the jhanas. A feature of the third level, or the third jhana, is happiness mixed with equanimity. And a feature of the fourth jhana is just equanimity. And this fourth jhana is often described as a stillness and a silence and a kind of luminously aware state. And it's described as a person covered with a luminous sheet. And in some ways, one would think this luminous sheet, like a cloth, a sheet. So this person is covered with this, and it's kind of bright. So in some ways, they're insulated from the ways of the world. They're insulated by the eight worldly winds at the same time as they're luminously aware and engaged in it. They're engaged in the world, but not of it. They're not shaken around by it. So this is a reflection of this fourth jhana, and it's one type of equanimity. And equanimity is also the seventh factor of awakening. And you've often heard me talk about the seven factors of awakening, mindfulness, and in this order, by the way. Not that they have to be practiced in this order, but this is the way they're presented. And often this is the sequence they unfold in. So it's mindfulness or being aware, soft awake presence, investigation of dhammas, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, then equanimity. So equanimity, just like it's a result of insight meditation and also serenity meditation, we have here as equanimity as the culmination of all the factors that have gone before it. So it's the culmination of both mindfulness, investigation of dhammas, and energy, which often represents insight meditation, actually, as well as joy, tranquility, and concentration, which often represents serenity meditation. And it's this result. So, so this is another way of understanding equanimity and another way to kind of cultivate it. And it's a particular type of equanimity. And yet another type of equanimity and a way it is practiced is as a divine abode, often called a boundless divine abode. And here, equanimity is not necessarily the result of meditation, but it is a meditation practice in and of itself. And it's where we rouse the signs of equanimity in whatever way we can. Like I invited you to practice in the guided meditation earlier. So we rouse a sign of equanimity. And then, just like with other serenity meditations, it becomes the object of our focused attention. We gently attend to it. And I didn't talk about the five jhana factors, and many of you have heard me talk about how we cultivate and how we proceed with serenity meditations. And the four divine abodes are, in fact, serenity meditations. They're concentration-based meditations. They're, if you're looking at different aspects, they are that way inclined. So what we do with equanimity as a divine abode, we rouse it, we gently attend to it, and we allow it to grow. We allow it to, we allow ourselves to become absorbed in it. And ultimately, the barriers between self and others dissolve away, and there is a sense of boundlessness, both in that sense of being having boundaries between self and other, as well as a sense of spaciousness. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they're called immeasurables, because there's no measure that one can put on this experience. It is boundless, infinite. Just as with the other divine abodes, warm benevolence, compassion, and appreciative joy, equanimity has its near and far enemies. Its opposites or far enemies include being emotionally overreactive to changing life events. You know what I mean by the near and far enemies? I'll just clarify this. A far enemy is like the opposite of that experience. A near enemy of a particular experience looks like it, but it is actually a false simile. It's a false representation of that quality. So equanimity, like the other divine abodes, has near and far enemies. The far enemies are its opposites, And these include feeling emotionally overreactive to changing life events, feeling responsible for everybody's behaviors and actions, taking things personally. Somebody says something to you, oh, it's all about me. Um, having poor relationship boundaries, and without equanimity, one is caught up in this kind of push and pull of attraction and aversion. The way we work with the far enemies is by cultivating equanimity. The near enemies, which are these distorted aspects of these qualities, like false representations of them, the near enemies of equanimity include a disinterested indifference, an insensitivity, an emotional dissociation or flatness, a disengagement, and a distant impartiality. It also could include having too many boundaries, like a sense of being cut off from connection, and possibly even a kind of superior aloofness. And I'm sure many of you have seen this perhaps in Buddhist meditation practitioners. I'm not sure. I know that sometimes I've kind of veered towards this tendency to be caught up in the near enemies of equanimity. And the way we work with this near enemies of equanimity is by working with the other divine abodes, in particular compassion. Compassion gives kind of sensitivity to the near enemy of equanimity, kind of gives a kind of connection. Do you remember what I said about Anali? I said once, emptiness. Emptiness, hold on, how's it go? Compassion, and now we're talking about the near enemies of compassion, but compassion without emptiness is exhausting. Do you remember that? Remember, some of you may have heard me say that. But compassion without emptiness, in other words, compassion without seeing the reality of interconnection and emptiness, is toxic. Emptiness without compassion is toxic. So emptiness without compassion is like somewhat similar to the near enemy of equanimity. It's like this perception of being kind of cut off and not engaged with things and thinking that's a realization of emptiness. So compassion is a way of working with this. It brings sensitivity to this kind of harsh aloofness, and it brings connection and softness to the harshness of insensitivity. So equanimity is also possibly the most powerful powerful way to work with the near enemies of the other divine abodes. It provides even-mindedness, non-discrimination, and differentiation from within an individual's experience. I remember listening to Dan Siegel talking about mindsight, and he talked about differentiation being this capacity to distinguish when someone's having empathy with another. It's the differentiation is the compassion, is the capacity to distinguish that person's feelings from one's own, if that makes sense. Sometimes there's a lack of differentiation with empathy, and we're going to get caught up in other people's experiences as if they're our own, but we believe it. They are our own. So differentiation is the key here. Differentiation, I think, is equivalent to equanimity. So equanimity works particularly well with the near enemies of metta or loving kindness. Remember, the near enemies of metta or loving kindness is a sense of being overly attached to another, depending on another to bring us happiness. Our happiness is dependent completely on another, or we feel like uh, uh, we feel that we are just completely dependent on another. It's like this. It's a conditional love rather than an unconditional love. So equanimity brings sobriety to that. It brings clarity to that. It sees us, it sees our, it sees the way things actually are. That we are responsible for our own feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, not another. So, as a divine abode, equanimity has a dualistic relationship aspect as well as a boundless non-dual aspect. The relationship aspect is marked by transcending attraction or aversion of living beings and looking equally on all living beings without preference or discrimination. Equanimity provides an aspect of neutrality towards beings, which is not biased by resentment or approval. It is without discrimination, bias, or prejudice, and therefore one does not engage in harm. Like the other divine abodes, equanimity as an abode works to harmonize and heal relationships with oneself and others. And at a boundless level, equanimity becomes a non-dual state of abiding. This boundless non-dual state is like those who are awake abide and relate. As we practice it, we experience what it's like to be awake. And in this way, sometimes it's called the heart's release. That's not only about equanimity, but the other divine abodes as well, when their experience is boundless divine abodes. And the heart release, sometimes it's called Chitta Vimukti in Pali. Sometimes it's related to as temporary liberation. So while we're abiding in this, we are experiencing liberation. It's a taste of freedom. And we see what it's like to abide like those who are awakened within the reality of non-clinging, not clinging to self and the fabrications of the world, rather seeing and being in the world as it actually is. Just this, without fabrications, without concoctions, with no greed, ignorance, and hatred. Here we see clearly there is no separate and lasting self. There is no thing. There is no thing. It's just dependently arising processes and interactions. And this is perfect equanimity. So at this point, I'll bring this Dharma talk to a close. Thank you for your wise attention.